Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. It's time for the Beatles on this date. So let's see what's been going on the date of November the 7th. And it seemed to be a lot of things going on through the years on this particular date. And the information comes from the Beatles Bible. The first story, the Beatles photographer Robert Freeman dies. This happened on 7 November 2019. Robert Freeman, the British photographer and graphic designer who shot the cover images for several early Beatles albums, has died. Robert Freeman, a longtime photographer of the Beatles, has passed away. He created some of the most iconic images of the band, featured on the album covers with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul. And then Ringo Starr stated, "God bless Robert Freeman, peace and love to all his family." And Ringo Starr posted that November the 8th, 2019. And Paul McCartney wrote, "Dear Robert Freeman has passed away. He was one of our favorite photographers during the Beatle years who came up with some of the most iconic album covers. Besides being a great professional, he was imaginative and a true original thinker. People often think that the cover shot for Meet the Beatles of our foreheads in half shadow was a carefully arranged studio shot. In fact, it was taken quickly by Robert in the corridor of a hotel we were staying in, where natural light came from the windows at the end of the corridor. I think it took no more than a half an hour to accomplish." Bob also took the Rubber Soul cover, and his normal practice was to use a slide projector and project the photos he had taken onto a piece of white cardboard, which was exactly album sized, thus giving us an accurate idea of how the finished product would look. During his viewing session, the card, which had been propped up on a small table, fell backwards, giving the photograph a stretched look. Instead of simply putting the card upright again, we became excited at the idea of this new version of his photograph. He assured us that it was possible to print it this way because the album was titled Rubber Soul. We felt that the image fitted perfectly. I will miss this wonderful man, but will always cherish the fond memories I have of him. Thanks, Bob. Love, Paul. Freeman was the photographer for 5 of the Beatles' first 6 UK albums, With the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, Help, and Rubber Soul. He also took the cover shots for the UK's EPs, All My Loving, Long Tall Sally, extracts from the album A Hard Day's Night, Beatles for Sale, and Beatles for Sale No. 2. Freeman's first photography session with the Beatles was appropriately for With the Beatles album, and it was shot on the 22nd of August, 1963, at the Palace Court Hotel in Bournemouth, England. Robert Freeman said, "The boys liked the idea, and the session was set up for noon for the following day in the hotel dining room. The large windows let in a bright sidelight, and the dark maroon velvet curtains were pulled around as a backdrop. We decided to use the black turtleneck sweaters which they wore at the time to keep the picture simple. The iconic shot was achieved using just natural light. Freeman was paid £75 for his work rather than the £25 originally proposed by EMI. Freeman also shot the cover photographs for John Lennon's books in his own right and A Spaniard in the Works, as well as designing the interiors. Robert Freeman, rest in peace." The next story is John Lennon's Gibson J160E guitar sells for $2.41 million. And this story occurred on Saturday, the 7th of November, 2015. The guitar played by John Lennon on the Beatles' first single, Love Me Do, has sold at auction for $2.41 million. 2 Gibson J160E jumbo guitars were ordered by Lennon and George Harrison from Rushworth's music store in Liverpool in 1962, after the Beatles were informed that they had landed an EMI recording contract. In addition to their first single, Lennon used the guitar on the singles Please Please Me, From Me to You, and on their debut album and its follow-up With the Beatles. At some point, the 2 guitars became mixed up, and the Harrison estate now owns the guitar originally bought for Lennon. The one Lennon used went missing for 50 years after being stolen during the Beatles' Christmas shows in Finsbury Park, London, 1963. In 2013, John McCaw bought the guitar from a second-hand store in the U.S. He grew curious about its origins, and after some preliminary investigations, contacted Andy Bobick, world-renowned Beatles instrument expert and author of the Beatles book, Beatles Gear. The guitar was sold by Julian's Auctions in California. Its buyer wished to remain anonymous. Also in the sale was a Drop T logo drumhead formerly belonging to Ringo Starr, which sold for $2.125 million. The buyer was Jim Irsay, owner of the American football team Indianapolis Colts. The drumhead was the second of 7 to sport the famous T-Drop logo and was used during the Beatles' historic first Ed Sullivan Show appearance. Our next story, George Harrison attends the Adelaide Grand Prix. This happened on a Sunday, the 7th of November, 1993. On 7 November 1993, George Harrison attended the Adelaide Grand Prix in Australia. Harrison was a keen motor racing fan and in 1979 released the song Faster about his love of the sport. In Adelaide, he gave an interview to the local news crew from Channel 9 who were covering the race. The race was won by Brazilian driver Ayrton Senna. The course was a temporary circuit in Victoria Park and the surrounding streets. Next, we have the recording of Stardust by Ringo Starr. This was done on the Friday, the 7th of November, 1969, at Wessex Sound Studios, Highbury, New Park, London. Producer George Martin, engineers Phil McDonald and Jeff Emerick. The third recording session for Ringo Starr's debut studio album, Sentimental Journey, took place on 7 November 1969. He taped the song Stardust with George Martin producing. The session lasted from 7 to 10 p.m. and took place at Wessex Sound Studios in North London. Stardust was made famous by its composer Hoagy Carmichael in 1929 and was recorded by many other singers afterwards. Starr's version was arranged by Paul McCartney with assistance from George Martin. The backing track consisted of strings, horns, piano, chimes, acoustic guitar, bass guitar, and drums. Starr overdubbed his lead vocals on the 14th of November, 1969. Our next story is John Lennon writes a short essay on macrobiotics, and this was on Thursday, the 7th of November, 1968. John Lennon drew a cartoon strip titled A Short Essay on Macrobiotics on this day. The cartoons were drawn for health magazine Harmony. Lennon created them while staying with Yoko Ono at London's Queen Charlotte's Hospital. The pregnant Ono had been admitted to the hospital on the 4th of November, 1968, while suffering from stress. However, she lost the baby on the 21st of November. Next we have Recording, Mixing, Editing, Blue Jay Way, Flying, Magical Mystery Tour. This was done on a Tuesday on November the 7th, 1967. It was done at Studios 1 and 2, EMI Studios, Abbey Road. Producer George Martin, engineers Ken Scott and Jeff Emerick. This busy day saw 2 separate sessions booked at different studios at Abbey Road, mainly for mixings of songs from the Magical Mystery Tour soundtrack. The first session took place in the control room of Studio 2 between 2:30 p.m. and 5:45 p.m. Blue Jay Way was the first song to be tackled and was mixed in stereo in 2 attempts. These were known as Remix Mono 1 and 2. This was followed by a simple stereo mix of Flying and edits of both songs. The balance engineer for this first session was Ken Scott. Scott was not involved in the second session, which was held in Studio 1 from 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. The engineer was Jeff Emerick. It began with 9 mono mixes of Blue Jay Way, numbered 20 to 28, followed by 3 more stereo mixes, numbered 10 through 12. The best of these, mono mix 27 and stereo mix 12, were then edited and became the master versions. The third song to be mixed was Magical Mystery Tour. 2 stereo mixes were made, and 2 overdubs were simultaneously added. During the editing of the film, John Lennon had added a spoken introduction. Roll up for the Magical Mystery Tour. Step this way. Hurry, hurry, hurry. It was decided that this should be added to the record release too. The 4th stereo mix was made during the 6th of November, 1967. The session was copied onto a new take, and Paul McCartney simultaneously recreated Lennon's spiel, although he left out the hurry, hurry, hurry section. A tape loop of Traffic Noise, assembled back on the April 25th, was also added. 2 stereo mixes, number 5 and 6, were then made of Magical Mystery Tour, followed by 3 numbered 8 through 10 in mono. The session ended with the copies of I Am the Walrus, Your Mother Should Know, Flying, Magical Mystery Tour, Blue Jay Way, The Fool on the Hill, and Strawberry Fields Forever, being made for Capitol Records representative Voyle Gilmore, who took them back to the United States for release. Next we have John Lennon meets Yoko Ono. This happened on a Monday, the 7th of November, 1966. On the day before her exhibition, Unfinished Paintings and Objects, was to open, Japanese artist Yoko Ono was introduced to John Lennon for the first time. John told David Sheff from the book All We Are Saying, that old gang of mine, that's all over. When I met Yoko is when you meet your first woman and you leave the guys at the bar and you don't go play football anymore and you don't go play snooker and billiards. Maybe some guys like to do it every Friday night or something and continue that relationship with the boys, but once I found the woman, the boys became of no interest whatsoever, other than they were like old friends. You know, hi, how are you? How's your wife? That kind of thing. You know the song, those wedding bells are breaking up that old gang of mine? Well, it didn't hit me till whatever age I was when I met Yoko, which was 26. 1966 we met, but the full impact didn't. We didn't get married till 68, was it? It all blends into one bleeding movie. But whatever, that was it. The old gang of mine was over the moment I met her. I didn't consciously know it at the time, but that's what was going on. As soon as I met her, that was the end of the boys. But it so happened that the boys were well known and weren't just the local guys at the bar. And in the book Lennon Remembers by Jan S. Winner, John Lennon said, there was a sort of underground clique in London. John Dunbar, who was married to Marianne Faithfull, had an art gallery in London called Indica, and I've been going around the galleries a bit on my days off and between records. Also to a few exhibitions at different galleries that showed sort of unknown artists or underground artists. I got the word that this amazing woman was putting on a show the next week, something about people in black bags, and it was going to be a bit of happening and all that. So I went to the preview the night before it opened. I went in, she didn't know who I was or anything, and I was wandering around. There were a couple of artsy type students who had been helping, lying around there in the gallery, and I was looking at it and was astounded. There was an apple on sale there for 200 quid, and I thought it was fantastic. I got the humor in her work immediately. I didn't have much knowledge about avant-garde or underground art. The humor got me straight away. There was a fresh apple on a stand. This was before Apple, and it was 200 quid to watch the apple decompose. But there was another piece that really decided me for or against the artist. A ladder which led to a painting which hung on a ceiling. It looked like a black canvas with a chain with a spyglass hanging on the end of it. This was near the door when you went in. I climbed the ladder and looked through the spyglass, and in tiny letters it says yes, so it was positive. I felt relieved. It's a great relief when you get up the ladder and you look through a spyglass and it doesn't say no or F you or something. It said yes. I was very impressed, and John Dunbar introduced us. Neither of us knew who the hell we were. She didn't know who I was. She'd only heard of Ringo. I think it means apple in Japanese. And Dunbar had sort of been hustling her, saying, that's a good patron. You must go and talk to him or do something. John Dunbar insisted she say hello to the millionaire, and she came up and handed me the card which said breathe on it, one of her instructions, so I just went, pant. And this was our meeting. And Yoko Ono said to the Sunday Telegraph on the 27th of November, 1966, Ad color painting featured white wood panels covered in cut-out perspex, plus brushes and paints on a white chair. Visitors to the exhibition were invited to interact with the piece in whichever way they chose. I call this ad color painting. It's very important to have art which is living and changing. Every phase of life is beautiful, so is every phase of a painting. Another piece was Play It by Trust, aka White Chess Set, which carried the instructions, play it for as long as you can remember who is your opponent and who is yourself, and who is your own self. There is also Painting to Hammer a Nail in, a hammer attached to a block in which people were invited to hammer nails. So John Lennon said, from the book All We Are Saying by David Sheff, and so John said, I went up to this thing and said, hammer a nail in. And I said, can I hammer a nail in? And she said no, because the gallery was actually opening the next day. So the owner, Dunbar, says, let him hammer a nail in. It was He's a millionaire. He might buy it, you know. She's more interested in it looking nice and pretty and white for the opening. That's why she never made any money on the stuff. She's always too busy protecting it. So there was a little conference, and she finally said, okay, you can hammer a nail in for 5 shillings. So smartass here says, well, I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in. And that's when we really met. That's when we locked eyes, and she got it, and I got it, and that was it. Lennon later recalled the date of their meeting was November the 9th, 1966, but that was after Ono's exhibition had opened. The most likely date was the 7th of November. That was the last story for the day. And if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. I want to wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for the Beatles Forever, the Beatles on this date. Thank you. Bye.